Hi Year 3, or WoW class. So today we have got our second chapter of The Royal Rabbits of London in the Diamond Chase. Chapter 2. "Where have you been?" asked Generalissimo Nelson calmly as Shiloh burst into the war room, out of breath and in a terrible panic. The little bunkin looked down the big table at the 4 large hopster rabbits staring grimly back at him, and one ear flopped over his eye patch because he felt so ashamed that he'd fallen asleep on his watch and therefore been unaware of the terrible crime that had been committed. "While you've been gone, the Siberian diamond has been stolen," said Laser, the American jackrabbit, slapping her whip on her leather boots in agitation. "How do we know that? Not because the royal rabbit on duty informed us, but because we heard the alarm bells all the way down here in the Grand Burrow and looked through the periscope to see police all over the place and everyone gathered in the diamond room." She looked at him and narrowed her blue eyes. "So where were you, Shiloh, when you should have been watching the palace?" Shiloh didn't know what to say. He shuffled, and the other ear flopped over his good eye. He made a great effort to lift it, otherwise he wouldn't have been able to see at all. "Well, answer the question," boomed Zeno in his Jamaican accent as he flexed his huge muscles. I can't do a Jamaican accent, it's not going to happen, sorry. Shiloh began to tremble. Zeno was the marshal of the Thumpers, the elite fighting force of the Royal Rabbits, and the huge hopster was 5 times the size of little Shiloh and extremely fierce. Shiloh's bottom lip began to tremble. "That diamond is so large I often used it as a mirror," said the elegant grey-haired Clooney, who was lounging in a chair, stroking his whiskers and looking dashing in his tuxedo. "With its many surfaces I was reflected 12 times." He turned to the little rabbit. "So where were you, Shiloh? It was stolen on your watch." "Well?" asked the Generalissimo, arching his eyebrow. Shiloh gulped. He didn't want to admit that he'd been asleep on duty. He couldn't admit that. He'd only just been invited to join the Royal Rabbits. How could he tell them that he'd failed, that the stolen jewel was all his fault? Luckily, his fur hid his blushes as he looked from one royal rabbit to another. Just then, a soft voice broke the silence. "Ooh la la! The most beautiful diamond in the world is lost?" They all turned to see Belle de Port sashay into the room. Her fur was rich and amber-coloured, and she wore a flouncy lilac dress accessorised with little jewels pilfered from the Queen's bedroom. She has so many. What is one less? Belle de Port always sang in her musical French accent. She strode up to the table in glittery high heels and waved a paw in the air. "Why do you think Shiloh is here?" Is that right? "Why do you think Shiloh is here? To inform us of the robbery, of course. Let us focus our minds on important things, like in finding that missing diamond." Shiloh gave her a grateful smile, and her brown eyes twinkled at him warmly. The royal rabbits turned away from the little bunkin and looked at Nelson. Shiloh was very relieved. "This is no ordinary diamond," Nelson murmured gravely. It's the legendary Siberian diamond. Tell us about it, Clooney." Clooney got up from his chair and hopped across the room, admiring his reflection as he passed a mirror. "Gosh, I am handsome," he whispered as he straightened his bow tie. He positioned himself behind a tripod with a projector that had been set up to beam pictures onto a white screen. The other rabbits gathered round, and Shiloh followed sheepishly behind them, struggling with his guilt. He wished there was a hole in the ground which he could dive into. Clooney clicked a button on a remote, and a photograph of the Siberian diamond appeared on the screen. Even though they had seen it many times, everyone gasped in awe. It was the biggest, brightest, shiniest diamond they had ever seen. No one gasped louder or more longingly than Belle de Paul, however. She loved diamonds more than anything. Belle put a paw to her mouth and sighed. "Ooh la la! It's truly magnifique!" Suddenly, all the diamonds she had stashed away in her burrow seemed small and dull by comparison. There's Clooney with his slide of the diamond. Clooney cleared his throat. The Siberian diamond was found 132 years ago by a Russian peasant on the snowy tundra of Siberia. He was grooming his old horse when he noticed a strange lump in the nag's dung. Thinking his horse had digested a potato and desperate for a good meal, the man delved enthusiastically into the pile of poo and pulled out the object. He was very disappointed when he discovered that it wasn't a potato, but something hard, sharp and inedible. Once cleaned, it became clear that it was an enormous diamond and most likely very valuable. Hoping for a reward, the peasant gave it to the governor, who was very patriotic. "This diamond belongs to the Empress," the governor announced, and after wrapping it in a velvet cloth, he sent it on a sleigh all the way to Catherine the Great in her palace in St. Petersburg. Catherine said it was so bright that she could read by its light. It remained in the Winter Palace, the official residence of the Russian Tsars, until just over 100 years later, when legend has it that the Tsar lost it in a bet to his cousin, the King of England, but no one knows for sure. Somehow the diamond ended up in Britain, and the Russians have wanted it back ever since. The British say it's unsporting not to honour a bet, and have always insisted it belongs here. The Russians, of course, disagree. "So who took it?" asked Laser. Shiloh hopped closer to the screen, dazzled by the picture of the mesmerising diamond. "Well, that's easy," replied Zeno confidently. "The Russians, of course." "Oui," murmured Belle de Paul, staring at its brilliance. "If I had lost a diamond of that size, I would most certainly want it back." "But why would they wait 100 years to steal it?" asked Laser. "They've repeatedly asked for it back, but their request has always been denied," Clooney told her. "Perhaps they just got fed up with asking and decided to take matters into their own hands. It's probably on its way back to the Kremlin right now," said Belle de Paul. "The Kremlin?" asked Shiloh. "It's where the President of Russia lives, in a fortress with red walls and pointed towers," Clooney informed him. Shiloh prayed to the great rabbit in the sky that the diamond hadn't already been taken to Russia. He'd never forgive himself if the Queen's favourite jewel was gone forever, all because he'd fallen asleep on duty. "I'm not so sure," said Nelson, banging his stick with its silver rabbit head on the floor. "The Russians are certainly likely suspects, on the ground that it belonged to them in the first place, and they feel it should be returned to them. But I hesitate to throw blame without having any hard evidence to go on." Belle de Paul narrowed her brown eyes. "Imagine how popular the president would be with his people if he returned the Siberian diamond to Russia. After all, it's the greatest diamond in the world," she murmured. "Whoever stole it won't have left the country yet, unless they acted very quickly. I suspect the diamond is still in London," said Nelson calmly. "And if it is, we're going to get it back. Clooney, Laser, Shiloh, go to number 10 Downing Street at once," he commanded. See what intelligence STBT has for us. Beldapore to the periscopes. I want to know everything that's going on in the palace. Zeno, prepare your thumpers for a fight. If we discover the Russians are behind this, well, you know what that means. And he looked grimly at the Hopsters, who looked grimly back at him. Shiloh frowned. The other royal rabbits knew something about the Russians that he didn't. Something terrible. What could it be? The little bunkin felt a shudder run down his body. It started at the tip of his left ear and rippled all the way down to his right hind paw. He had been on many adventures since leaving his country home, outwitting the pack of snarling corgis, escaping from the clutches of the evil ratsies, and even overcoming his fear of foxes in the fox club beneath number 10 Downing Street. He hadn't imagined there was much else to be afraid of, but he sensed that another adventure was about to begin, and he was going to need to summon his bravery once again. And that's the end of chapter 2 for today. Have a fantastic rest of your day, and I'll see you very soon. Take care, stay safe, bye!